Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast. I'm Mark Fierro. Tyler Morgan, publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine, is off today. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk for a moment about this Curlis case, because I've been doing this a long time, and I have never seen the stakes higher, talking about the death of an infant. And initially, because of the coroner's report, law enforcement, those big giant gears went into place and said this mother killed this infant in a case of shaken baby. Where did you start with that? Tell us about the genesis of that case.
Well, I started when she was first interviewed by the detectives after her baby, actually during the process of her baby dying is when the detectives jumped in because the doctors at the hospital saw certain signs that they, in my opinion, rubber stamp as child abuse. And it's called really the triad. It's called retinal hemorrhages, bleeding behind the eyes, cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, and then subarachnoid hemorrhages, which is bleeding between the certain layers of the brain, rather. So when you get those, they label it as shaken baby syndrome. And so once a doctor sees those, they automatically say, all right, we're calling in the detectives because somebody must have abused this baby. And so she came to me after she was interviewed by the detectives. She hadn't been charged with anything, and in fact, they didn't end up charging her for about a year after that. And we voluntarily turned her in, and then we got her out the next day on bail. And we had been fighting that case for 3 years. And over the course of time, we had a lot of people get involved in that case pro bono. I took it at an extremely reduced fee. And these types of cases are hundreds of thousands of dollars to represent somebody, because some of these medical experts, one in particular, $55,000, right? And he was paid for because we had the Innocence Project, the Arizona Innocence Project, involved in this case. And we had an individual named Randy Papetti who wrote one of the main books on shaken baby syndrome. So we had all these key players in addition to the top doctors in the country, because I wanted the best, because this lady was innocent without a doubt from day one. And we had the doctors look at everything. Every single doctor that I had look at, the tissue slides, the autopsy report, everything said that the baby died of natural causes. They all came to the same conclusion that the baby died of natural causes. And so we kept gearing up for trial. The trial got continued. COVID played a role, and then got continued a few different times for various reasons. Experts weren't. It's like herding cats to try to get everybody together. But ultimately, sat down with Wolfson, with Dr. Evan Matches out of San Diego, who has his own autopsy lab, took a much deeper dive than the coroner here in Las Vegas, way deeper, and went into the microscopic slides and could see the cells of the baby Josiah were sickled. This baby had the sickled cell trait when it was born. Now, most of the time it doesn't turn into the sickle cell disease, but it can. And this was one of those rare situations where it, in fact, unfortunately did. And we looked under the microscope, and it was as clear as day. And the baby also had an enlarged heart. And so ultimately it went into cardiac arrest a couple times. So anyways, going back to sitting down with Mr. Wolfson, it was me, Dr. Matches, who was our main expert, and Randy Papetti. We sat down with Wolfson, we sat down with Robert Daskis, the assistant district attorney, and we sat down with Michelle Joby, who was the prosecutor on the case from the very beginning. And we showed them the medical evidence of how this baby died. And we simply asked them, hey, take a look at this, please. I talked, Randy talked, Evan, we all talked, and he said, sure, all right, I'll take a look at it, Ryan. and we'll get back to you if you can send us these additional tissue slides. Sure enough, 2 months later, I get a call from Michelle Joby, and she says, we're going to dismiss the case. And it was just, the biggest win of my career, that's for sure, because it can't get much worse than a mother, right, who loses their baby and then gets charged with first-degree murder of killing her baby. So a lot of passionate people involved here, and it all paid off. It was a big team effort.
In the movies, this kind of stuff happens all the time. Everybody stands down and they go, we made a mistake. In real life, it never happened. This took a lot of guts on the part of the district attorney's office.
I thank Mr. Wolfson for doing this because he did the right thing. And for even giving us a chance to sit down with him and lay it all out. We appreciate that from him, from Mr. Daskis, from Ms. Joby. And so the fact that he did that was very big for us, and we certainly appreciate that because it relieved Christina of this nightmare that she was facing, okay? Now, there's still a caveat, okay? And the caveat is that the case was dismissed without prejudice, okay? So what that means is that technically, at any point in time, at any point in her life, because there's no statute of limitations on a murder case, they could bring back the charges. Okay, let's say, for example, the medical science changed. But if you look back to the 90s, the Boston Nanny case was the start of all this shaken baby stuff. The medical science has only gotten more in favor of debunking the shaken baby syndrome. So you want to fast forward it to 2033, I don't anticipate it getting worse, but better, again, to follow that, trail. So potentially she could be charged again, right? Her kids, have to live with the fact that, hey, my mother could be taken away at some point again in her life and be charged with murder, right? Do I think it would be extremely rare? Yes, given the fact that they voluntarily dismissed it. Would I have liked that it had been dismissed with prejudice? Of course, because that would have for sure put an end to it all. But she's happy. We're happy with the result. And she's finally able to be around her kids without any restrictions. I mean, her kids were taken away from her for years for something she didn't do.
There are photos days before the baby starts going through and having the health crisis that it did. Obviously, this is a loving mother with 3 other children. That have never had any problems in any way, shape, or form.
Never.
That was one of the most emotional. I sat there outside the court, and I can understand why she broke down. I completely understand why she broke down. And I don't think that she necessarily understood the media's role, but that's not her job. She's just supposed to be a mother. She's supposed to be a mom and take care of her kids. And I think she struck out at the media a little bit, but I can understand the pressure and after seeing your name and your family treated in that way. But that is just an amazing case. You had probably the in terms of just sheer numbers, the biggest case we haven't even hit on yet, just touched on in the intro, and that is you had a young man who was accused of shooting somebody in this kind of, not necessarily a gang, but a confrontation between schoolyard, and it was on A&E. And I got to tell you, our staff sat here, and we're pretty seasoned. We've been around the block a few times. Yeah. And we sat there, and we would have swore this kid was innocent the whole way through the entire show. You really had him pegged. You had him going down the right path. Tell us about that case. Tell us about how the case started and what you thought your chances were once it got rolling.
It started when he was a juvenile, and they certified this case. And it was a school shooting, and when I say school shooting, not within the school, shooting a bunch of other kids.
It was on the.
It was
playground.
It was behind the baseball field.
Yeah.
Where there were individuals that were jumping, big individuals, big high school kids played basketball, were jumping one of Sakai's good friends. And ultimately they were jumping him so bad that he ended up protecting his friend, because Sakai is a small guy.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet back then. And these other guys were 6 foot, 6'2", and stomping his friend on the ground, which could easily kill somebody. Mm-hmm. And he shot, not in an effort to, like a police officer, to aim to kill, right? He shot in an effort while he was moving backwards. And one of the bullets hit an individual named Dalvin Brown, and that's who died. In regard to, the beginning of the case, our position was that he didn't do it, okay? That it was a mistaken identity, because there were so many different versions of the story, as you can imagine, from all these different kids from all different vantage points. Circling these high school fights, you've seen them before. The kids circle around, and now they got the phones going and everything, but nothing was actually caught on film, surprisingly, in this situation. And it was right after school got out, so you had the parents pulling up on the side of the road. So you had so many different things going on and so many different stories from the interviews of these witnesses that it just all got twisted up. I didn't see who shot the gun, some of them said. I saw who shot the gun, or I just saw the gun, held up in the air. I didn't know who had it. And then we get into going out and interviewing these people before trial. And their story changed from, I saw Sakai shoot, to no, he wasn't the shooter. He didn't shoot. There was a guy in prison. No, I was just, that's wrong. I didn't say that, basically.
And most importantly in this case, and this comes up in great novels, police novels and all these novels about law enforcement, that it looked as if the police had forced some of these witnesses to misstate what they saw.
Right.
And so these kids are saying, I never said that. I never said that. Anybody who says that I said that is lying.
Yeah.
Turned out that wasn't necessarily the case.
No, that wasn't necessarily the case. In the beginning, the cops had multiple suspects as well. Mm-hmm. And then they ultimately came up with Sakai through these witnesses. But yeah, you're right. I mean, when I went and talked to them, and it's evident on the police recordings that it does shut off at one point.
It gets right to the threshold, and then magically
it shuts off.
The recording shuts off, and then comes back on after a brief discussion.
Right, and so that major issue for a police investigation and for a defense lawyer to jump on, for sure, because that's just improper. And so when we talked to these witnesses, they said, no, I didn't say that, or I was forced to say this, or they kept pressuring me to say this.
Well, we didn't say that.
Right, and that's what we got from a lot of them that we interviewed, and we felt, all right, this is a case of mistaken identity. They got the wrong guy. Now, not all of them said that. One of the witnesses was consistent with what he told the police, and that was a damaging witness for us, so it wouldn't have been an easy trial by any means. No. But ultimately, it came out that he shot in the defense of others, his friend, and we got him from a first-degree murder charge all the way down to a voluntary manslaughter without the use of a deadly weapon, which is a 1 to 10 probationable, and he got, if I can remember, he got 3 to 7, I believe. So he didn't get the max, and he had a lot of credit for time served already. So he'll be out, relatively soon, up for parole rather. So that's where that case is at now.
This is way inside baseball, but I'm just so curious. At what point was that his mother was in court that morning for sentencing? Was she aware that he was going to not only was he going to admit his role, but that he was going to admit that he had carried a gun for years prior to that? Did she have any idea that he was going to go the extra mile?
Now the gun thing, I don't recall him telling his mother about that or us round tabling that part.
That was pretty shocking.
Yeah, and I think and that was one of the biggest issues, bringing a gun to school, and that's what the judge saw, of course, in addition to the killing. But bringing a gun to school grounds is an issue, especially nowadays, right? That's serious stuff. So did the mother know that? I don't know if she knew that he carried a gun and for how long he carried a gun. I know that he carried it, he told me, for protection. And again, I told you he's this tiny guy.
That was an amazing case and a lot of twists and turns. So how is he doing? How is he holding up now that he's in the day-to-day of inmate life?
Once he got that weight off his shoulders with regard to this case and certainty, clients who are involved in a criminal case want some level of certainty, right? Whether, hey, we're going to go to trial and we're fighting for not guilty, or hey, I'm taking this deal or I want this deal and this is what I'm looking at now. I got certainty now. I focus on the road ahead. So how's he doing now? He's doing fantastic. He's doing really good. I talk to his parents every now and then, taking advantage of every program he can in prison. He's a good kid. He comes from a really good family, and I anticipate that this young kid, once he gets out, I anticipate that he'll likely, if I can help, try to get him out on the first time of parole. I think he's got a good shot. And I think he's going to be a successful young man.
Well, the two things that are critical to ending prison life and coming out in mainstream is, one, expressing regret. So he's got that out of the way. He has, in fact, he admitted his role, and a lot of guys end up third and fourth and fifth hearing before they figure out, hey, I'm not going to admit it, I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
And the big thing is his mother. He's got a loving family. He's got the support, and so many people, the reason they're in prison is because they don't have any family whatsoever.
Unfortunately.
And she's a wonderful, you could tell, just a wonderful, wonderful mother, caring parent.
I mean, they're like family to me. You get involved in these cases for so long that you get to know these people, right? And some of them you become close friends with, or basically like family, right? And they are, every one of them, amazing family.
I wish him the best. I hope when he comes out, he figures all that out. I think he's at least on the right track now. Right. We worked on a case together, and I don't want to say your client's name because I want to kind of delve into the background of it. But the biggest stakes ever. Here we are. We're doing a focus group, and we're taking apart whether or not this guy is going to be found guilty, because if he goes to trial and he's found guilty, he's doing life with the potential of doing life back to back with life, because it could run consecutive. Who knows? That's entirely in the hands of the judge, right? Sexual assault. Got some twists and turns here. And the part that I'll never forget, and all of our staff, all of our guys on our team all looked at each other and went, whoa. And what it was is basically this. We know that we can't win in focus, so we don't try for that. We're trying to get everything out of the prosecution's case. Find their weaknesses, find the strengths. What do you have to deal with?
Exactly.
And then we start throwing darts a little bit and see if we can move them over to our side. But I was going back into the room with your client over and over, with you and your client over and over, saying, now this part is a push. This is not what's going to happen in trial. I'm going to push them. I'm going to get them to say that you're not guilty. I want to see what it takes to get there. So at the end, we wrote an analysis, and I pointed it out to you. We were both on the same page on this, and it was basically, if this comes in, if this part comes in, you're going to the stripey hole. You are, in fact, going to prison. The rest of that stuff was trying to undo that, but you can't do that in court as long as this comes in.
Right.
And that night we were looking at a guy going to court, and he decided he had till the 11th hour. Tell us about that day when he says, I'm going to trial. I'm going to get, and you know he's going to prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah, that was a very tough case because of the virtually a confession in regard to some telephone conversations that were recorded by the alleged victim, not only between him, the defendant, and her, the alleged victim, but also the defendant's son and the alleged victim. Recorded phone calls where both of them basically confessed that
and said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry,
I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for my dad doing this, and please don't go to the police, I'm not like that, I got a family, that's gonna ruin my family, all this type of stuff that the jury's gonna say, hey, you're trying to persuade her from not saying that you raped her.
Yes.
So, very bad facts. And in addition to the recordings, there were text messages and social media messages that would look very suspicious in front of a jury. So, in regard to fighting that case, and I did the preliminary hearing, way back when we first had the case, and cross-examined the alleged victim, poked some holes in the story, inconsistencies and stuff like that. But she was relatively close to what the police report was saying. But in any event, ultimately I ended up getting a negotiation on a sexual assault case of pleading guilty to attempt sexual assault, probation, and if successful on probation, reduced to a gross misdemeanor. And which gross misdemeanor coercion, I believe, non-sex. That means you can seal it off your record after 2 years. You get a sex crime, you can't seal it off your record. He didn't take it. He wanted to continue to trial. So we show up at trial, and the jury is there, they're lining up, right? I'm in the ante room with the family. I'm talking to the family about these recordings and talking to him about these recordings and showing him the analysis that we did in the focus group. And at that point, you could tell his family's like, hey, you're facing a life sentence here. Maybe you should really think about this. And so I went back to the DA, who took that deal off the table. It was going to be I believe, a right to argue on a sexual assault case. You face life with the possibility of parole for 10 years. And I was able to, fortunately, get him to come back down, which is very difficult to do for most prosecutors, but, he was a very reasonable prosecutor, and of course I appreciate that. And he went down to probation on a attempt sexual assault. And still a hell of a deal that we were fortunate enough to get.
Take all the interim steps out, go to prison for the rest of your life, or walk out the front door that day.
Right.
That's pretty tall cotton, I would say. That's pretty tall. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, Ryan. It's great working with you. And in the old days, there were some huge names in the criminal defense bar, and they just stuck out like thumbs. Some of those guys have embraced you early on, and I think I see why. And what it really comes down to is this: you outwork everybody. You
That's
just keep
what it
working.
comes down to.
That's what it comes down to. Thanks again for joining us. We really do appreciate you having.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me.
And with that, we call it a day. Remember to like and share the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast on Facebook. Catch us on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher. And for all of you out there with a story idea, or an axe to grind, you get a hold of Vegas Legal, the leading magazine in the Southern Nevada legal market. You call Tyler Morgan at 702-222-3476. Reach out, tell us, tell your friends. Have a good one. We're out of here.